Good. Hi, Lydia.
Hi, Sam. How are you this morning?
I am very well today. It's so good to see you and good to be here to talk about this because, I am always looking for ways to do a better job of sharing my faith in Christ with other people.
Yes.
Because, oddly enough, the Methodist church that I grew up in, as awesome as it was, didn't kind of train me how to do that.
Yes, that's a very, sounds familiar. I had the same experience growing up.
So, but our faith is something that we want to be contagious. Somebody shared their faith with me when I was a young person, and people in my congregation continue to share their faith with me. And so and that's how I grow. So we wanted to take an opportunity to join you, to ask you to join us as we sort of wallow around in this a little bit. And in order to guide us through the wallowing, we're looking at a book called Get Their Name, which is encouraging us to do evangelism by building new relationships with people. So, and the thing that we really like about it is that it kind of starts with some baby beginning steps then kind of grows from there.
Yes, because one of the experiences I was telling one of my church members about the seminar, and she looked at me and said, the famous, which I'm sure we get from all of our people, "Oh, I could never do evangelism. I cannot walk up to a stranger and go, do you know Jesus Christ?"
I know, right?
So
do you have a few minutes to talk about Jesus as your personal Savior?
Yes.
Yeah. Lydia and I are both pastors of smaller churches here in the Dothan District. I'm a pastor at Cloverdale United Methodist Church. We have between 40 and 50 on Sunday morning. It's a congregation of primarily older adults. And it's an interesting thing as we age, I know it's true for me that as my kids are growing up, I'm kind of less involved with school, and I'm less involved and when people retire, they're less involved at work, they don't have a work. And so their domains kind of shrink a little bit. So how can people do that? So where are you?
Well, I'm a Tabernacle United Methodist here in Dothan, and a similar thing. We have about 60 to 70 every Sunday, and it is an older population. And Sam's right, the social circles tend to shrink as you grow older. So it makes it even more imperative to reach out, to be able to build new relationships, to share your faith story. And that sounds daunting at first. So what we want to do is, as Sam was saying, go back to the baby steps and make it really easy and attractive to do, as opposed to this idea of, I've got to walk up to strangers and I can't do that.
Right. If you accost too many people in Publix, they call somebody to come get you. Right. That's right. All right, so this is the book that we have read, and your Dothan District Leadership Team. This is one of the reasons why we're doing this is because Sara has put together a leadership team that is visionary and that is trying to help our district do lots of kind of new things like this. So we have decided, sort of as a leadership team under Sara's leadership, we have decided that what we want to do is spend the rest of our year kind of talking about this issue. So this is kind of a first bid, I guess, at that. So this is the book that we have been reading together, and we're going to be looking at the first part of it. There is a study guide that you can get, a participant's guide. So if you wanted to get the book and study it with your church, it's a great thing. This webinar is going to be recorded too. So if you look at the first part of the book together, then maybe you could watch the recorded webinar together too.
That's a very good idea.
Yeah. All right, so this is kind of where the rubber hits my road here a little bit, and that is that I'm a Gen Xer, okay, and I was born in 1966, so I'm almost a boomer, but Gen Xers are cynical about everything, and the first part of the book helps us understand why this is so important. That of the Generation X children born, more than 40 years ago, fewer than 20% are connected to God through church. And, that's I mean, 1 in 5 of my generation.
That's right. Now, I'm a boomer, so we're a little more. There's 35%, but that's still a small number. And so we want to find a way to make it more attractive to go out and say, hey, guys, come and join us. This is what we have to offer. Because if we don't grow these areas, where's church going to be in 20 years?
Well, the next sentence tells us, right? Among millennials, fewer than 10% are going to be connected to God through a church. And that's where we're headed. You know, I lived in Canada for 5 years, and, you know, their progress in this is a lot more further along than ours. And it is essentially a kind of a post-Christian culture there.
Yes.
And that's where we're going. They're kind of the canary in our coal mine, so to speak. So that's the reason why we're really interested to do this. And a lot of times we don't think about Dothan as being, I mean, there's a church, you can't, you know, as Daddy would say, you can't sling a dead cat without hitting a church in Dothan, Alabama. But those are just buildings, right?
That's correct.
Right. All right. So one of the things that they begin to do in the book is to define the E word. Lydia, what is the E word?
Oh, be careful now. The E word is evangelism.
Oh, yeah. Yes, evangelism. And, you know, because we all have a lot of preconceived notions about what evangelism is, and it's related to the word evangelical, which I consider myself to be, but there are other evangelical people that I'm like, I'm not sure that the news is the same.
Yeah.
So, you know, so it's hard from time to time to kind of think about that word and to help our people think about that word. How many times I have people who are willing to serve on the board of trustees and that are willing to serve, but when I say, who wants to be on the evangelism team?
Yes, and as a matter of fact, our church changed the name of it from evangelism team to hospitality because we could not get anyone to join it. So this is a problem.
So yeah, it is the language, right? So here's what the folks ask us to, how they ask us to sort of think and define evangelism. That, you know, evangelism is simply building authentic relationships with people we don't know. I mean, we're Christians who are doing this, right? And so you might, you know, have some complaint about that definition because you would want it to be more specifically or explicitly Christian, you know, to invite. But this is where we begin.
Yes.
We're beginning. And so look at that sentence, Lydia, and tell me what do you think are like the most important words in that sentence?
To me, personally, the most important word is authentic. You know, being authentic with people as opposed to we just got to get numbers in, or, you know, or we just got to get deep pockets in. This is about authentically wanting to know who someone is and share your story with them, have them share their story with you, and build that trust so that you can share the faith.
That's right. Authentic relationships. All right. So this is sort of the progress of how they will move through this. So why don't we stop here? Is there any, Clint, do we have any particular questions at the moment? Anybody saying anything? Anybody? Anything in the chat going on? How do I make myself, I know this is not the normal question I ask. How do I make myself bigger? There, how's that? There we go. All right. So I'm going to, so what I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to unmute us for a moment and see if there's anybody that has a particular question. How have we confused you? Can we unconfuse you? Anybody? Everybody's good. No questions.
Great.
Ready to plow ahead. Very good. All right, so I'm going to mute you again. And here we go. All right, so let's look at this. Let's see, now why did I see? Anyway, okay. So here is here is a slide. Are you, Clint? Is the slide up? Okay, great. So they began talking about faith sharing through service. I don't know about you, but in most of the congregations that I've served, and in the Cloverdale church where I am now, we have several ways that our people go out in service.
Yes.
To other people. In other words, they want to reach out and do good things to express their care for other people, right? Yes. For instance, just yesterday morning, we had, this isn't necessarily going out, but it is an act of service in that the Cloverdale Elementary School, which is right across the street from our church, they were looking for a place to host their 5th grade graduation. Mm-hmm. And so we hosted them in the fellowship hall there because their lunchroom is very small, and it was packed. 41 5th graders, and there were 150 people in the room. So that was an act of service. How could we have, and we didn't really sort of explicitly say anything else other than welcome, which was great. Right? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But how could, what is a way that we could have done more to sort of explicitly extend the welcome of Jesus Christ to them in a way that isn't pushy?
Well, the book recommends, and this is a great idea, that when you do the good deed, you don't just do the deed mm-hmm. without adding the word to it.
Right. So, there are any number of things that we could have done. We were hosting it, so we could have, respectfully, invited people to come to, our church of a Sunday morning. There are a lot of ways that we're in connection with our school, and I'm always wondering how can we sort of thicken that connection so that we extend care to the students and staff at that school in Jesus's name, yes. Right? That we make it explicit. So one of the things that the authors of the book talk about is that, in order to have good news, you have to add good words to good deeds.
Yes.
And that makes good news. So in our acts of service, for instance, some people I have seen will go like to Walmart and hand out a bottle of cold water during this hot summertime. And a lot of times they will put a label or something around that says,
this is who we are,
mm-hmm.
and it says a little word about God's love, mm-hmm. and then it includes also an invitation.
That's right. That's it. So, Lydia, when you think about the things that your congregation is doing at Tabernacle, how are some ways that you think of that you could just slightly modify, mm-hmm. right? Slightly modify what is done so that it becomes more of a faith sharing thing.
Well, one of the things that we do on a regular basis is we go serve food once a month at the Dothan Rescue Mission. Mm-hmm. And when I first got here, it was just doing the good deed. My group would stand behind the counter and serve wonderful food, and then they would just leave. Mm-hmm. So we decided, that's not really enough. We need to add the word to the deed. So now I've encouraged my people to stay after the food has been eaten and come and sit down in the dining room, introduce yourself to some of these folks, have a little chat with them, get to know them. We have made little business cards for all the members of the church that say, we're with Tabernacle, we have our mission statement that say you're invited to come as a guest. Mm-hmm. And we always invite the people to come and to visit us. Mm-hmm. So we include with just serving them the food, also sitting down and stirring their soul by talking to them, asking them to share with us, and then inviting them.
We serve at the Dothan Rescue Mission too. And can I say that every time I go, some fascinating person.
Yes.
There is a guy, I think, when I sat next to him. So we somehow superhero movies came up, and he is like, it was like we just sat there and nerded out together. All right. So this, basically this homeless guy and I are sitting here just talking over and over about all of these various movies. And, that was the possibility of an authentic relationship.
Absolutely. And this past week, I met this wonderful gentleman who was a rapper and Def Jam, what did he call himself? But he had all these fantastic faith raps that had scripture in them. And it was amazing. And I thought how much my youth would love that. What a way to present the word to them. But I would have never gotten to know that someone in the community is doing that, or that here's a resource and, we can help him, he can help us. It's fascinating when you stop and sit down and get to know and talk and add service and word with the deed.
That's, we're already caring.
Yes.
By doing the deed, right? By offering this act of service. So isn't it just extending our care like one more level by, going just a little deeper?
Yes.
Daring to do that. All right, so that's kind of the chapter 1 of the book, and that is sharing your faith through service. So we'd love to hear from you guys. Are there any questions that you see there, Clint? That we
Yes,
could...
this is from Andy to everyone.
Oh, okay.
Years ago, I heard Dr. George Moore say, "We were good in the UMC at doing good deeds, but not saying why we did what we did."
Yes.
He encouraged us to do the deed and to name the name of Jesus. So the comment.
Yeah, I think that's
and that's exactly what this is saying. You've got to add the name, the naming of Christ, the reason behind the deed, in order to make it good news and not just good deed, which is the first step to building that authentic relationship that we're talking about. That's right.
How can I? So our congregation. There are at the elementary school across the street. There are several families there who do not qualify for public assistance, but who also kind of really struggle. And so the guidance counselors know who those families are, and they connect those families with us at Thanksgiving and Christmas time. So we help them by providing some food support at Thanksgiving, so for a meal, but then also we buy their kids everything they want on their Christmas list. And it is an amazing thing. The people at Cloverdale are so generous. So, how is it that we can kind of amp up our invitation to connect with them, through that process? Because we've not done that, right? We haven't done that as well. Yeah. Anybody else? Clint?
For me, Anita says amen.
Amen.
Go on.
Yes. Okay. Good. All right. So what's next?
Well, once we've taken this first step of adding this good word to the good deed in a rather anonymous fashion, he says, then we need to step back and start within ourselves and in our Christian communities, learning how to share our faith story. And as Sam said when we first started in the introduction, we both grew up in the Methodist church, and yet I can honestly say in all of the Sunday schools or small groups or most of the groups I was in, we never practiced sharing our faith story. It just was not done. And unfortunately, that's very un-Wesleyan, because Wesley based early Methodism on sharing your faith story. And the question that was asked in the early small groups or in the clubs that he was putting together was, how is it with your soul? And that is the beginning of looking inside of yourself and thinking, well, how is it with my soul? Where have I encountered God? What is it that I can share today? And that's what we want to take in a more modern context within our church community in small groups, and ask and get used to doing this and saying, how is it with your soul? Where did you see God working in your life this past week? And get us used to reflecting on that. And by doing that, it creates all kind of wonderful things. It starts getting the person who's thinking about this centered on God instead of centered on, when you leave the church on Sunday, you tend to be centered on God for that 1 hour. And then you go home and life invades. But if all during your week you're saying, I know Sunday I'm going to have to, or Wednesday night, whenever you have your small group, we're going to talk about where I've seen God. You start centering on God's presence. Where is God today? What has he done? What's happened in my life that I can say, God's grace has broken into my day? So it helps to center the person practicing their faith story on centering on God. And then the other people sharing, it helps them to see the transformation and help them to share and start doing their own centering. So it builds on itself. And the wonderful thing about that is, once you become comfortable with your own faith story, then it's easier to step out of your own context and invite people in and share that faith story, because it's something you're living every day. And you've got the story because you're talking about it, you're sharing it, you're building on it.
That's it. You've got a beginning kind of set of language to talk about it. So this past Lent, we used the theming for worship that came from from Discipleship Ministries. It's hard for me not to say Board of Discipleship because it's just, I'm too old. And so anyway, we used that, and one of the things that they included as part of that was some small group resources that you could use during the week. So we decided to do that. So we would have on Sunday morning, we would have the particular theme, whatever the theme was for that day. And then on Tuesday, I would meet with a small group, and we would continue to talk about that. And it was very much kind of geared in that way. In other words, how did this good news about God impact you?
Yes.
Right? Where did you, and they, in the book, and Get Their Name, they, in almost any small group, you could begin a small group meeting with, how have you experienced God in your life this week?
Where did you see God working this week?
That's it.
Where did God break in? Where did you see it? And it can be really small things. That's I encourage, we have a point in our worship service where I ask people to share where they've seen God working in the past week. And it can be really small things. It doesn't have to be major life events. And that's how you get started. I saw this, or this happened, or I reconnected with someone. Just looking starts that process of seeing God everywhere.
We have, one of the things that we do, that what we're talking about is redefining a lot of these terms, like evangelism. And here's another one, which is testimony.
Yes.
We think about testimony being, share your testimony. Well, I'm going to get up for 15 minutes and, tell you what I was like and what happened to me, and then what life is like now, thanks to Jesus Christ, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But because we think in those terms, it even the smallest of things can help us. I remember preaching an Advent sermon where I asked people, I brought these gold chargers from my dining table, and I brought them, and I asked people to take chargers with them. So I had 8, and we just passed them around through Advent and various people in the congregation. And they could take that, and they could put it behind the head of somebody that they had, like who had been instrumental, like been God's presence in their life. And they could take a picture of them, and it looked like there was kind of a halo back, behind them. And then we collected all those pictures, and then we would show them on Sunday morning. So it was a way that people could, could do that. That's really more about worship than it is about groups. So let's talk about groups again, and say that one of the things. So my small group, my Tuesday small group, has continued to meet.
Yes.
And it has been so much fun. So now we're meeting every Tuesday, and we're talking about the stuff of the sermon the Sunday before, but then how it kind of impacts their lives. And you can tell they're beginning to really learn how to talk about their own faith story.
Absolutely. And another thing that it does, the small groups experience, typically you have more of a relationship already built. So it's a safe space.
Oh, yeah.
You're not going to experience judgment or people going, that's ridiculous. So it's a really great place to start for people who are just not used to sharing their story, or to saying, I think I saw God here today. And when they do start sharing, they're going to get support from that small group. So it really is the perfect situation to start implementing, the faith sharing aspect of what we need to do.
And if you are if you are expecting, that the small group is going to come up on Tuesday, then you're going to start looking for things through the week, right? It's going because you're like, oh, I know I'm going to be asked this question, right? And so how can I develop, one of my favorite preachers and writers is Alice McKenzie, and she talks about developing a knack for noticing.
Mhm.
You know, that that one thing Christians can do through the week is developing a knack for noticing where God is moving, you know, in life, in the newspaper, on the, you know, in
Absolutely.
TV. It's not
Anywhere,
just,
right,
it's not just in your church. Christianity isn't just for church anymore.
There you go.
There you go. All right. So,
Questions or thoughts about this step?
I've got one that I'm currently typing in. So,
oh, okay. Well, you don't have to.
It would be helpful for people to practice telling their faith story in a small group environment.
Absolutely.
Oh boy, yes.
It's the place to start because, as we mentioned earlier, you want to do it in a situation where you've been a part of that group. You already know the members in that group. There's a sense of security and safety, emotional security and safety, so that you're not afraid to share your story. You're not afraid that you're going to get judgment or dismissed. So that's why the small group setting is really the best setting to start for people who just have never done this before.
That's right. It's, you know, right, because you're there in that familiar kind of church family thing, and you know, you can be selective, you can gradually grow in how much you share, that kind of thing. I think that's important.
Absolutely. And as pastors, as the leaders, you know, I recommend as a first step, getting with your education committee and talking to your class leaders and saying, we want to start some of our classes a new way. Let's do this for a certain period of time, a month.
Oh, how cool.
And that way everybody's on board and everyone's practicing. And then we can look at it at the end of that month. How did that go? Where did you see this going? And we can take the lead, being the pastors, and ask our leaders to support us in this to get people more comfortable.
And you know, there are seasons of the church life that lend itself to that, like Lent and Advent,
Absolutely.
which are, you know, times of more introspection and that kind of thing. So you're right. It's not something that we would say we're going to do this from now on, but we're just going to do it for this season, and we're going to try this on and see how it works.
That's absolutely right.
So because, you know, some people just are not as you know, they're just not as introverted as you and me, Lydia. And all right, so our fearless leader, Sara Shaver.
There's another resource too if you're uncomfortable about how to begin, called Tell Your Story, and I can get you the author of that book, but it's a book that helps you walk through the process of your life and see where God has been at work all throughout your life, and it begins to enable you to see how to see God at work, and that when you have conversations with these people you're beginning to make relationships with, it enables you to see where God is at work in their life and share with them. So that's a great book.
To notice those moments.
I think that is so cool.
That's a God moment. Yes.
Well, that's it. And you know, testimony is always backward looking.
Yes.
In other words, it's always after the fact that we look back and we say, oh, you know, God was there and I didn't know it. Right. And but now I can look back and I can say that. That's what testimony really is. So that, and so we learn to develop that set of lenses so that when we're walking through life now, you know, I mean, I recently had, you know, a set of events in my own life, and it took me a good while to sit, because there was a disappointment that happened. And, you know, just walking through that, it felt bereft of God, right? It felt like I was abandoned by God, but, you know, it took a little time to get past it, but then it's like, oh no, God was all over that, you know. And so developing skills to learn how to do that.
Absolutely. And as Sara was saying, in a small group setting, other people might recognize where God's working in someone before they realize it. So that's another good thing about doing it in a group. It's very difficult to do this on your own, because other people can give you a perspective that you just may not have yourself.
Yes, Clint?
We have a question from Anita.
Okay.
She says, I want to have small groups in the church, but I'm not sure how to start. I'm thinking more small groups meeting in homes. Are any of you doing that?
We are not doing home meetings. We do them in our church right now. So I don't have.
Clint, do you do? You did some home meetings.
We started I'm picking up on it.
Yeah, I think so.
All right. We started a small group in a church member's home over the Lenten season, and my experience. Oh, hello. Our experience has been that the change environment has been crucial. There's been much more sharing about people's faith and spiritual needs than we found in the more, lack of a better word, sterile church setting. So we found that's been incredibly valuable to have it in the home. That just the environment has a and
Mhm.
impact. So yeah.
Right.
You know, that's it. I was discipled in the Christian faith as a young person through home meetings. You know, I mean, that's where it all. Now, I was involved in church, but that was where it really happened. All right. So, anything else, Clint?
Okay, we have a comment from Andy.
And Day.
George Strait sings a song about seeing God in the small things entitled "I Saw God Today."
There
Yes.
you go.
And that's exactly what we're trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Andy.
All right, George Strait.
Okay, so we've talked now about adding the word to the deed, and we've also talked about learning a safe environment to start
Mhm.
learning and practicing your faith sharing story. So what's our next step here, Sam?
Well, what they encourage us to do is to think about helping people share their faith in worship.
Oh.
So let me start here by saying that I know that there are several preachers, you know, on the line here, and that's essentially what we're doing when we preach. Is we're using the scriptures as a lens through which we can interpret our daily lives,
Mhm.
right? And so we can say, you know, well, God is here in the scripture in this way, and here's where I see God at work, you know, today. So that's what we're doing. But you know what? We're not doing this. We are not doing this in lieu of everyone else's testimony. Did you know that?
Amen. Absolutely.
we are there as a model to show them how to do it. We come to believe something so thoroughly about the gospel that we're willing to stand up in front of everybody and claim it, so that they know how to do that too.
Yes.
So when you have gotten used to being able to speak some, perhaps in a small group, then as a pastor, you might consider how can you help people offer those kinds of witnesses and stories in the context of your worship services that you're offering. And so there are a lot of different ways that this could happen. One is that if you have a theme of a worship series that is going on, for instance, in Lent, when we did the rehab series,
Yes.
you know, we have some people that are kind of part of the recovery movement, and you know, what would it have been like for them to write something about their story and print it in the bulletin? You know, they might not have wanted to give up their anonymity,
Right.
but they could write something and put it in the bulletin. So that would be one kind of way that is, they don't have to stand and speak. Right?
Absolutely. And I think what Sam is trying to say here, and what the author of the book is trying to say, is it's not karaoke service. You don't want to give the mic to someone and just let them go off, which is why it's important to develop practicing this in the small groups, and then learning how to integrate it into your worship service so it fits.
That's right.
It fits into the theme, and it fits into what you're doing. Sarah was just reminding me at Tabernacle, we want to share some of the things that some of the different groups are doing out in the community. And even though I have people that are really great at going out into the community, they just do not want to get up and share in person at church. They're very shy or introverted. So we have done a series during the offering where they have filmed or taken pictures of the activities and the events. And then during the offering, we say, this month, we're going to highlight our missions team and some of the wonderful things they have done, or we're going to highlight our education team and the VBS. But it's a way they can share what they're doing and share their walk in faith. And it integrates into worship quite smoothly. And you're not putting someone on the spot to stand up with the mic, because a lot of people are just not comfortable with that. And you want the quality of this sharing to be good. You don't want people to be afraid, because you want to empower other people to do this, and you want it to be exciting and fresh. So we want to find ways and use our technology in worship to help us find ways to do that.
One of the beautiful things about being United Methodist is that we're not afraid of, we believe in analog authenticity, but we're not afraid of digital use,
Amen.
right?
Amen.
And so we can do that a bit more. And you know, all of us have you know, these phones on our hips, and you know, whenever we go someplace, we need to be taking, you know, and just to ask a question, even with simple video, you know, at the Dothan Rescue Mission, you know, obviously you don't want to film people without their permission, but if it's one of your church members, you can ask, you know, how did you see God, you know, involved in this tonight? Would you be willing to share that for just 3 sentences worth?
And you'd be surprised at how excited people get doing that, as opposed to if you'd ask them to stand up in church Sunday and talk about it.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And it's very easy to go around, get some pictures, and like, you know, and like Sam was saying, be careful. You know, some certain circumstances you do need to get people's permission, but it's exciting, and people enjoy seeing what's going on, and it opens up to the rest of the church that good news.
So here and here are a couple of other things that you know, that I'm interested in, that I'm kind of looking forward to doing, that I haven't done before, and I know I'm going to learn a lot about this kind of thing, but as I go. But you know, we have to be willing to fail and to screw something up, right? So you know, as Martin Luther said, let's sin boldly. And one of the things that I'm looking forward to doing is, like, what if right between the announcement time and the like the prelude or the opening hymn or whatever, what if, you know, I popped up a video of maybe half a dozen different people saying why, you know, in 1 or 2 sentences, why do they come to this church? Why do they worship in this congregation? And knit those together. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be, but if you're looking for someone to do video production for your church, even if it's a small membership church, get a kid, because they all know how to do this now. Everyone, my son is 14 years old, and he is like a Photoshop. He's certified. He is a certified Photoshop person, so he can do anything. So get a kid, go find a grandkid or something like that. You know, pay them $10 a week to put a little video together, and they'll do it. They know how to do it. Or here's another thing. If you're looking for production help, go to Fiverr.com, Fiverr.com, and you can get a millennial in Nigeria to put together. I mean, you just send the raw video, and for $10, they'll put together a nice little thing for you. It's pretty cool. All right, so yes, so that's another way. But then I also want to say in worship that actually including real voices in real time is important.
It is.
And you're going to have people in your congregation that are better at that. One of the things that where do you start with that? Well, one place where you start is including their voices in a safe way in worship. We have lay readers that share scripture on Sunday morning. So now I have a cadre of people who are used to that.
Right, they're comfortable.
That's it.
They're comfortable standing up in front of the congregation.
That's right. And I remember during a stewardship time, we wrote a skit that 2 of our lay women did. And so it was scripted, but it was hilarious. It was fun and funny, and they were able to kind of put their own twist on it and everything, and they loved it, and the congregation loved it. It was just good. You know what, Lydia? This just requires a little more work on our part.
It does. But it's exciting, and it's fun, and that's how we need to approach sharing God and our experience with God. It should be fun and joyful and exciting. So we want that to spread.
Are you telling me this can be fun?
Absolutely.
It can be fun.
It can be fun. Do it with joy.
That's it. Okay.
So this is a big topic because, you know, we like, as pastors, and I know this is my one area of control. I do like to have control in my worship service. I don't want it spinning out of control. So please, if you've got some questions for us about this part, this is a good time, I think, to look at those.
Yep. What we got, Clint?
Okay, I think I put that website up. Let me make sure I got this right. Fiverr, Fiverr. No more questions. That's the only this topic in chat.
Okay.
Any questions about how to integrate this in worship? Anybody doing this already that they want to share?
Yeah, right. Exactly. What are you, you know, how are you including voices of laity, adults and kids?
And kids,
right?
It's very important.
In
young
the
and
worship
old.
service. I will unmute you for a moment. You're unmuted. Oh, no, yes,
There
you're
we
all
go.
unmuted. Anybody else doing anything fun? Tell me who you are, and then share. Oh, that's why you're doing the
Yeah.
webinar.
This is Dan. Can you guys hear me?
Dan
Yeah, we can hear you,
Bachman.
Dan.
Yeah. So we do testimony time after the sermon, like as a response to the word,
Right.
sort of altar call time, and it's mostly plants, if that makes sense. Like people I've coached beforehand on not telling them how they've seen God, but I've heard how they've seen God in that week, and so I asked them if they would share. And actually, for our upcoming homecoming, we do homecoming services. That is going to be 5 different people sharing how they've seen God in our church and in their lives for the last few years,
Yeah, that's
all
wonderful.
ages.
Well, one thing I like that you said there's nothing wrong with coaching people, because people are, they're not, we're used to getting up there every week, and we're used to the flow of the service. We're used to how long our 20 minutes or so takes. So there's nothing wrong with coaching people to be more effective. I think that's wonderful, and I think people appreciate that. But the other thing that you said that I really like is by adding this element of worship, we're listening more as pastors, because now we're listening to our congregation to see where they're seeing God. What story am I hearing? Now I'm connecting more with my congregation. So like doing it in the small groups, there's better connection and communication even on the bigger level with the church. So it might be that we're hearing something that this person doesn't even realize is where they've encountered God, and we can help them develop that story and invite them to share it. So I do like that, Dan. That's a great idea.
All right. Lastly, then then having grown from adding good words to good deeds, and having grown through being able to share faith in a small group, and then being able to share faith in the context of worship, then we jump fully into something different.
Yeah, so now we're stepping outside of our comfort zone, because it's been kind of the anonymous sharing of the word. In that first step, it's easy to kind of put a note with a bottle of water. It's easy to share your story in a small group where you know everybody. It's easier to share it in your church congregation because you do know all of those people. Even though it's a little intimidating to get up during worship, it's still a safe environment for us. But the point of all the things we've talked about so far is us practicing doing this, because the whole reason that we're sharing this story with each other is so we can take the ultimate step, which is now sharing with the unchurched. And that's the whole point of all of this. It's great to share our stories with each other. It props us up. It makes us look where God's working in our lives. But if we're not then taking this out of our church building, out into the world and reaching out to the unchurched, it's really all for nothing. We're preaching to the choir. So that's the next step. It's that inviting people to worship. Now, we're not saying go find a stranger. That's not what the author's talking about. At no point is he saying just go out on the street and flag down a stranger and invite them to your church. He's saying look at relationships you might have at work, or maybe you've gotten to know some people really good at the grocery store that you go to all the time, or the mailman down your street, or other groups that you're in, other secular groups. And it's time that you want to invite that unchurched person, or maybe someone who's been at church who's fallen out, to come. How do we do that? Well, one of the things that I think we're tempted to do, and the typical invitation is this: hey, I'd just love for you to come to the church sometime. See you next week. And then we kind of leave. That is not an invitation. That's a suggestion. So the proper invitation is this: it's face to face or phone to phone. Sam, how are you doing?
I'm great, Lydia. How are you?
I'm doing great. Well, let me tell you something. Our church is just having this special Sunday where we're going to have this guest speaker talking about a great topic, and we're going to have lunch afterwards. I would love if you would come this Sunday. It's at 10:30. Do you think you could make that?
Sure. I'm not doing anything else. That'd be great.
Well, wonderful. Well, I'll tell you what. We're going to be coming right by your house. Do you need a ride there?
Why not? Sure, that'd be fun. We can go to, we'll have lunch together, and then I have kids. Is it okay if they come too?
Absolutely. We have nursery for little ones. We've got things for the youth. Come on, I would love that. I will see you Sunday. I'll be there about 10 o'clock.
That'd be great. Thanks.
That's very different than why don't you come to my church sometime? So the elements that the author talks about is face-to-face. You want to either be on the phone with somebody or right in front of them and make it specific, personal and specific. I want you to come this Sunday for the 10:30 service, or I want you to come Wednesday night for our dinner at 6 o'clock. You want it a specific time and place, and then make it relational. Hey, bring your kids, or, would you like to come with me? Do you need a ride? Make it more personal and relational. That's the type of invitation that we're talking about. Now, I love what the author talks about next is, why is it that we don't normally do that and we do the suggestion instead? And his answer to that, and I think it's really true if we think about it, is that we're actually afraid that the person is going to say, yeah, I want to come to your church. Tell me about it. Why do you go there? What do you find at your church that works for you? And we don't have that story. That is the whole point of practicing the faith story, so that when we do share with someone that's outside of our church circle, that's unchurched, and they ask us, so why do you go there? What do you get out of that church? What's important there for you? You have practiced that faith story enough that it's just so easy to answer that. So that's what this is building up to. Get comfortable with it in your smaller settings, in your church, so that it's easy now to go out to people you have a connection with already, and you can start inviting them and sharing with them about the story of your faith.
In small communities, which a lot of us, we serve churches in rural areas, and Dothan isn't exactly rural, but it's pretty close. We often think to ourselves, well, everybody around here is already connected to a church.
Right, we do think that.
But if you have, and I'm not talking about, plundering the Egyptians, I mean the Baptists, but what I mean is, if you create special things at your church, right? Special events at your church. Now, obviously every Sunday can't be a special event, but if you plan these around those seam times of the year, back to school.
Yes.
There are a lot of churches a lot of other churches that don't do back to school kinds of things. So if you know a local family and you're going to have a service where you bless students or bless the backpacks or whatever, you can do that. Christmas Eve is a good time. A lot of times rural churches don't do very much with Christmas Eve. So it's a great time to be able to do that. Even New Year's. I remember when I was growing up, I grew up in an area where watch night services were really, and I mean, some of them did that whole, we're going to stay up till midnight and all that kind of thing. Now, you don't necessarily have to do that, but make it fun, make it intergenerational, make it, find ways to do that. And you don't have to do it all the time. The next thing is, for me, the key thing about finding people who are not connected, as opposed to, and we can talk about unchurched or we can talk about unconnected people. That, in other words, there are people who, like where we live, everybody thinks they're churched. I mean, everybody's got a relationship. Everybody knows, some clergy person that they'll ask that they could ask to marry or bury them, right? Well, they wouldn't ask to bury them, but anyway. All right, so. But everybody's got an idea about where they're churched. But are they connected?
Yes.
Right? Are they connected first to Christ and then next to a church family? And so how do we do that? Well, one of the things that I really encourage my people to do, and it's hard. It's hard for me too, but I have to increase the number of domains in which I move. That's what I have to do. I have to find new areas whether it's attending an interesting class at the library or going down to the Cultural Arts Center and or auditioning for a play, which I haven't done here, but I've done in other communities where, you know, I would get involved. And see, that's a time limited thing, right? You're working on a play for that couple of months. So, you know, Lydia, how do you think people could kind of increase the number of domains that they're moving around in their local community, particularly if they were an older adult? What do you think? What could they do?
Well, I think there's a lot of resources. Now, Dothan is a very senior-friendly place, and there are several areas that do classes for the seniors. The recreation centers here, there's the Taylor Senior Center. So as a pastor, it behooves us to go and find out about these places and share that information with our congregations. You know, say, oh, there's a great swimming class at the Westgate Recreation Center that some of you folks might want to take. You're going to meet all kinds of people there. Oh, they're having a special speaker at the Taylor Senior Center. Why don't you go and find out some information? You're going to meet people there. So encouraging your congregation and getting out yourself to some of these different local groups that aren't church sponsored, but they're community sponsored is very important. And it helps you to get to know and understand your community as well.
I'm very involved too with our local, like our interfaith. We have an interfaith luncheon once a month here in Dothan. And, you know, that's been a great place, you know, to meet people who probably aren't going to come to my congregation, but being connected with them helps introduce me to other people in their lives too.
Right.
So that's been really good. You know, I think the last thing I kind of want to say is that it all comes down kind of to the heart for me. And, you know, what is our motivation, right? What is our motivation? And can we care about other people enough to be curious about who they are? Can we care about other people enough to be curious about who they are? Not just that you have something to share with them.
Absolutely.
They may have something, you know, chances are in a relationship, you're gonna experience something good there too.
And that goes back to the beginning. This is about authentic relationships. It's not about adding numbers. It's not about adding dollars. It's about reaching people and getting to know people and to caring about others and sharing your story and learning from them as much as you hope they're going to learn from you.
Numbers and dollars are just a result of caring and being curious. Numbers and dollars happen when we care.
That's right. The money will follow.
All right, beautiful people. What else? Is there anything else there?
Questions?
I have a comment from Anita. This is going back to the sharing and worship. She writes, just to get the young people accustomed to sharing and worship, I allow the youth to lead the affirmation of faith or have them pray before the altar.
That's wonderful. A great idea.
Start young.
Wonderful way to include those voices in a non-threatening way.
Yes.
Right?
Get them involved, and they're comfortable at that age. They're going to stay comfortable. And if your youth are like my son, if one's doing it, they all want to do it.
That's right.
So it encourages the other. That's great. Thank you. Anything else about the invitational part to the unchurched? Because this is where the rubber kind of hits the road for us.
I will. So I'm going to unmute us now. Here we are. So we're pretty much done with our presentation part, and so we'll just, you know, what's going on for you? How are you processing this? Is this helpful? Is this, have you gotten a couple of ideas that you might be able to carry away with you?
You have done a great job. I really appreciate it.
Good.
Well, we hope that you've gotten a few things today that you can go back and look at starting to implement them. But we do recommend, you know, for you five that are getting the book, it's a great book. It's got some very practical application aspects to it, which is wonderful, because when I read things, I always want to know, how do I go back and do this? It's a great idea, but how do I use that idea? We'll get that here.
Oh, and I think the participants guide to even more directly get you to that. So.
And it may be something you would want to do with the leaders in your church, your admin, your leadership council, or your evangelism team, if you have one, to do this with them as a class. Before we go, do we want to talk about saving the date?
Oh my gosh.
Yes.
Yeah, the whole reason why we're, you know, continuing to think about this. That's right.
Yes, we'll save the date because we're going to continue, the Dothan District is continuing this discussion and learning about how to approach evangelism, how to learn to share our stories of faith. And the next step is going to be a seminar on
September the 29th. And we don't have, so if this is a save the date announcement, we don't have a lot of, so the book we're going to be looking at there together is called Talking Faith. And so the name of that event is Talking Faith, 6 Fun Steps, because it's fun, to sharing your faith. So that will be an event that we can all come to and kind of do some talking, practicing probably, maybe a little role play, that kind of thing, and trying to figure out how to do this even more effectively. So stay tuned. We'll have locations and all that sort of thing lined out later.
And we hope to see you all there, get to meet you in person instead of just on the screen.
All right, so lastly, let me say, all right, so we have Anita, what is your last name? Anita Brown, okay. Just making sure, we just wanted to make sure we were able to get everybody. Anybody else have any thoughts? Yes, Clint?
Question, Andy wants to know how we can access the recording of this webinar moving forward.
We will, yeah, okay. I don't know. We'll figure that out and we'll send an email out about it and we'll post on the Facebook page where you can click through to find it.
Right, or email from the Dothan District will be coming out.
I don't know if it's, in other words, I don't know if we can download a video and then upload it to YouTube or what we can do, but we'll figure, but it'll be a link of some kind. Oh, okay, all right. Anything else, beautiful folks?
One thing I like to pray daily is, God, please show me how I can be a part of what you're doing everywhere I go today.
Oh,
Amen.
wonderful.
Isn't that great?
Amen.
Mm-hmm.
He is at work.
Mm-hmm.
And he will create the opportunities for us to show compassion.
For sure. They're everywhere.
I call it divine encounters.
Oh, I like that. I like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anything else? All right, Sara is going to come up behind us. There you go. Yay. Sarah's going to come up behind us and she is going to lead us in a closing prayer. So please know that we're really thankful that you joined us for this today. And, you know, we get more out of it than anybody because we get to think about it and look forward to doing new things in our own congregation. So thank you to Clint. Thank you to Sara and Sara and the leadership team. Yes.
Gracious God, we give you thanks for this day. We give you thanks for the opportunity to be together, for Lydia and Sam as they share this good news of how to share the good news. We ask that you open our minds and our hearts to possibilities and show us the people that we come in contact with, that we can share not only ourselves, but you with them as we develop our relationships. Enable us to now share with our churches and beyond how we can grow this possibility so that we can continue to share the good news so that more people will know you. It is in Jesus' name we pray.
Amen.
Amen. All right, guys, you're all beautiful and you're all broken, but God loves you anyway, and there's not a darn thing you can do about that.
Thank
all
you
right,
all.
see you.
Be blessed.